Gratitude is not just a pleasant feeling, it is a precision tool that retunes the nervous system, sharpens perception, and shifts the probabilities of your next moment. Think of your body as a living laboratory that constantly predicts the world a few milliseconds ahead of time. Your brain runs internal models, expectations about what matters, what to ignore, what to prepare for, and those models are biased by emotion. Gratitude feeds the predictive machinery with a signal of sufficiency and safety. When you practice it deliberately, interoceptive channels from heart and viscera begin sending calmer data to the brainstem and insula. Heart rate variability rises, respiration lengthens, the vagus nerve conducts a steadier rhythm, and the cortex interprets, "I can relax my guard, resources are available." In that state, your attentional lens widens. Threat cues lose their magnetic pull, and opportunity cues gain contrast. You haven't changed the past, but you have altered the priors with which the next frame of reality will be rendered. In a grateful state, the brain's salience network marks different things as important. The amygdala stops flooding the stage with alarms, the prefrontal cortex regains executive range, and hippocampal circuits can re-index experience not as proof of scarcity but as evidence of unfolding support. This is neuroplasticity at work. The synapses you fire under the chemistry of appreciation wire into future expectations. Dopamine then behaves less like a frantic lottery and more like a measured teacher, reinforcing exploratory behavior rather than compulsive defense. That is why gratitude feels like a higher frequency. It's not about mystical hertz emanating from the body, it's about cleaner, more coherent oscillations across neural assemblies, gamma bursts that synchronize perception and action, alpha rhythms that quiet mental noise, slow breathing that couples heart and brain into a single metronome. Coherence is the physics analog here. When oscillators sync, small inputs move large systems. A grateful nervous system is a phase-locked system, ready to amplify the slightest hint of possibility. This shift is not only in the head, it is embodied. The baroreceptors that feel each heartbeat, the stretch receptors that sense each breath, the immune cells listening for danger, all receive instructions from emotion. Gratitude downregulates the biochemical language of urgency and instructs the body to repair, digest, and learn. In that terrain, memory reconsolidation becomes pliable. When you recall an old event while holding a state of genuine appreciation, the brain can rewrite the emotional tag before storing it again. The story doesn't vanish, but the charge dissipates, making room for a different identity to form around it. Identity is simply the sum of stories the nervous system believes. Change the emotional climate in which those stories are rehearsed, and you change who does the rehearsing. Consider attention as a currency. In fear, you spend it to prevent losses. In gratitude, you invest it to discover gains. Attention shapes measurement, and measurement shapes outcome. The moment you catalog 3 specific things you appreciate and feel them somatically, in chest warmth, jaw softening, shoulders unhooking, you instruct the thalamus to alter sensory gating. New signals pass through that formerly would have been filtered as noise. People call this luck, physiology calls it a revised feature map. The world hasn't rearranged itself for you, your instrument has become sensitive to a spectrum it previously ignored. Gratitude also edits time. Under stress, time collapses into immanence. You stand inches from the canvas and see only dark strokes. Appreciation moves you back a few steps. From there, patterns emerge, reciprocity, serendipity, long arcs of meaning that are invisible at panic distance. This temporal dilation allows the prefrontal cortex to simulate larger solution spaces. Creativity rises because the system is no longer spending metabolic budget on guarding the perimeter. You can feel this as a subtle surplus, the extra breath before speaking, the impulse to ask a kinder question, the willingness to hold silence until the deeper answer arrives. That surplus is the raw material of transformation. There is a chemistry to this. Oxytocin increases social trust, which expands networks of cooperation. Serotonin stabilizes mood and discourages zero-sum thinking. Endogenous opioids soften pain enough for curiosity to re-enter. Even at the level of gene expression, the cell listens to context, a body kept in appreciative coherence biases toward repair and learning pathways. None of this requires belief, it requires practice. 5 minutes of paced breathing at the start of the day, inhale slowly, exhale slightly longer, paired with precise, sensory-rich gratitude for something real, not grand, not performative. The warmth of your mug, the crisp line of morning light on the wall, the message from a friend that arrived exactly when you needed it. Feel it until the body agrees. The goal is not to think grateful thoughts, but to reach the state where the thoughts become unnecessary because the physiology is already broadcasting the signal. As this state becomes more familiar, your inner narrative changes tense. Instead of bargaining with the future, when it happens, then I'll feel whole, you start rehearsing wholeness now. Predictive processing will then search the environment for matches to that template. You'll notice the collaborator who complements your blind spot, the opportunity that aligns with your values, the skill gap that once felt like an indictment now showing up as an invitation. Gratitude does not bypass grief or dismiss hardship, it gives you a stable reference frame from which to metabolize them. The measure of mastery is not how often the world obeys you but how rapidly you can return to coherence when it doesn't. This is why gratitude sits at the apex of transformative states, it integrates opposites. It allows you to be fully awake to what is and still open to what could be. It reduces internal entropy, less random fluctuation in thought and physiology, and therefore frees energy for directed change. Think of a laser. Ordinary light scatters in all directions, coherent light travels as a tight beam that can cut steel or heal tissue. Gratitude brings the scattered photons of your attention into line. From that alignment, intention is no longer a strain, it is a natural vector. The environment begins to echo you back with improbable precision, not because reality was coerced, but because your measurement apparatus, the sum of brain, body, and story, stop drowning out the signal with static. In that quiet clarity, the next right action often feels obvious, and the world, sensing your steadiness, meets you halfway. If we zoom closer into the mechanics, emotion functions like a boundary condition in the brain's Bayesian engine. Every perception and choice is a negotiation between bottom-up signals and top-down predictions. Gratitude sharpens that negotiation by reducing model uncertainty. When uncertainty drops, the cortex expends less energy explaining away errors, and more energy sampling reality for useful novelty. This is the free energy principle in daily clothes. By stabilizing interoceptive predictions, heartbeats, breath, gut tone, you give the system a reliable inner constant, so it can invest bandwidth outward without bracing for impact. The felt sense of appreciation is not an afterthought, it is the control parameter that tunes the gain on prediction errors, letting signals about opportunity ring louder than the background hiss of threat. Consider the tug-of-war between the default mode network and task-positive networks. In rumination, the default mode dominates, looping autobiographical narratives and imagined catastrophes. In genuine appreciation, coupling shifts. Midline hubs quiet just enough for frontoparietal control to re-engage, and dorsal attention regions can lock onto goals without the usual interference from self-talk. On EEG, you often see a simultaneous rise in frontal midline theta, associated with cognitive control, and a cleaner alpha rhythm over visual cortex, a signature of sharpened inhibition of noise. Coherence is the practical payoff, sensory cortices stop amplifying irrelevant features, executive regions stop second-guessing each move, motor plans commit with less jitter. The subjective translation is simple, decisions feel clearer, and action costs less willpower. The immune system listens in. Macrophages and microglia sample molecules that mirror your neural state, from catecholamines to cortisol. In sustained stress, microglia retract processes and prime for alarm, biasing attention toward injury signals and pruning synapses that carry exploratory patterns. Under recurring gratitude, the tone shifts, noradrenergic surges are smaller, glucocorticoid pulses are briefer, and anti-inflammatory cytokines gain a foothold. Plasticity can proceed without constant cleanup of stress byproducts. You are not manifesting, in the mystical sense, You are removing friction from learning hardware so new behaviors have a chance to stabilize before the next alarm resets the board. Memory's edit button, reconsolidation, makes gratitude particularly potent. Each time you retrieve a memory, its synaptic trace becomes labeled for minutes to hours. Pair that window with a somatically anchored appreciative state and the brain may attach a different tag to the same episode. The facts remain, but the prediction they feed into future choices changes. A setback that once trained the system to expect scarcity can be refiled as evidence of growth. Over repetitions, this retagging shifts state action values in the striatum. The probability landscape of what you try next warps toward exploration. People call that optimism. Reinforcement learning calls it value updating under altered reward prediction error. Breath is the steering wheel. Slow inhalations that follow slightly longer exhalations entrain vagal pathways and baroreflex loops, timing cortical excitability to cardiac cycles. On each exhale, inhibitory tone increases. On each inhale, readiness returns. Layer a specific, richly sensory recollection of something you appreciate onto that rhythm and you create a repeating pattern. Cardiac respiratory coherence sets the tempo, interoceptive safety sets the context, attentional systems mark new cues as relevant. After a few minutes, you can feel the switch flip from sympathetic mobilization to flexible engagement. This is not sedation, it is precision. Athletes call it being loose but locked in. Social physics change too. Oxytocin's role is often caricatured, but its most practical function here is to reduce the expected cost of cooperation. When appreciation rises, your brain predicts that letting someone into your problem space is less risky. That prediction alters eye gaze, micro-expressions, and prosody in ways others can measure unconsciously. Their nervous systems mirror your coherence, rapport forms faster, information flows with fewer defensive edits. The network effect is real. Coherent individuals synchronize group dynamics, and synchronized groups solve harder problems. Gratitude is therefore not only intrapersonal hygiene, it is a tool for collective computation. At the cellular boundary, gene expression follows state. Epigenetic marks, methyl tags and histone acetylation, are influenced by hormonal and metabolic milieu. Periods of coherent parasympathetic dominance tend to favor repair, synaptogenesis, and metabolic efficiency pathways over the perpetual mobilization programs of fight or flight. No one flips switches like a comic book hero, but the accumulation of bias matters. 10 minutes a day over months can tilt baseline expression just enough that recovery is faster, sleep is deeper, and learning sticks with fewer repetitions. In engineering terms, you have improved signal-to-noise and reduced phase noise in the system's oscillators. Even creativity can be framed mechanically. Idea generation is the controlled destabilization of existing models followed by restabilization around a better fit. Stress locks models, fear penalizes deviation. Gratitude lowers the penalty for wandering off the beaten path. The hippocampus is freer to replay unusual combinations during quiet wakefulness. The prefrontal cortex is less punitive when bizarre associations arise. Many describe this as synchronicity. A stricter phrasing is that you are sampling a wider region of state space and tolerating surprise long enough to test it. When your physiology predicts safety, you can afford to be interested. The ethical edge is worth noting. A grateful state does not erase pain or absolve injustice, it expands your choice set in the presence of both. The more coherent your internal oscillations, the less you must distort data to protect identity. That frees you to confront what needs changing without the drag of self-defense. You become better at distinguishing tractable from intractable problems, which prevents burnout and sustains action. In that sense, gratitude is not a retreat from reality but a calibration to it, a way to lower internal entropy so scarce energy can be spent where it counts. Continue, and the system you call you starts behaving like a well-tuned instrument, sensitive to faint signals, resilient to noise, and capable of turning tiny inputs, one conversation, one email, one decision, into outsized shifts in trajectory. Consider how measurement alters the thing measured. In physics, an observer coupled to a system changes its accessible states. In biology, attention coupled to the body changes which pathways recruit energy. Directing precise, felt gratitude toward a future event establishes a boundary condition that the nervous system tries to satisfy. The prefrontal cortex prototypes the scenario, the insula checks that the internal milieu remains regulated while you imagine it, and the cerebellum quietly optimizes microadjustments so behavior can move that prototype into the world with less friction. This is not wishful thinking, it is constraint satisfaction across neural hierarchies. You repeatedly hold a coherent internal pattern while sampling reality, and actions that maintain coherence get reinforced while those that break it are penalized. Over days, that reinforcement sculpts habits that look like luck from the outside. Laboratory markers make this visible. When people sustain sincere appreciation for a few minutes and then perform a working memory task, reaction time distributions narrow without a loss in accuracy. That means less internal noise. Heart-brain phase coupling tightens, which you can see in the cross-spectral density between respiratory sinus arrhythmia and frontal theta. In plain terms, the body's metronomes align, freeing cortical bandwidth for discrimination instead of firefighting. The result is a subtle shift in base probability. You answer the email sooner, you notice the pattern faster, you speak at the moment when your words can actually land. Small deltas compound. Prediction error, the brain's currency of surprise, becomes more informative under gratitude. In anxious states, surprise is overweighted and quickly generalized. A single negative cue can reset the whole map. In appreciative states, surprise is parsed more precisely. The anterior cingulate flags the mismatch, the prefrontal cortex tests alternative models, and the amygdala holds its fire long enough for evidence to accumulate. That microdelay is everything. It allows the system to update beliefs without collapsing into reflex. You feel this as a quiet confidence that persists even when data contradicts your preferences. The paradox is that this flexibility, not rigid belief, is what makes outcomes look aligned with intention, because you are actually tracking reality closely enough to steer. Gratitude improves the learning loop by stabilizing sleep architecture. Deep non-REM cycles consolidate procedural skills, REM sleep integrates emotional meaning. People who end the day with specific, sensory-rich appreciation often show fewer nocturnal awakenings and stronger slow-wave activity early in the night, followed by more orderly REM later. Better consolidation means the next day starts closer to mastery and farther from reactivity. You do not need hours of rituals, you need a reliable state change before lights out, 2 or 3 detailed moments you re-experience until the body answers with a full exhale and the jaw lets go. There is also a thermodynamic angle. Living systems export entropy to maintain internal order. Chronic stress floods the organism with random microcorrections, muscle bracing, shallow breaths, fragmented attention. That is expensive. Genuine appreciation reduces corrective noise at the source. Muscles economize tone, gaze stabilizes, saccades become purposeful, and metabolic cost per unit of cognition falls. Athletes describe this as effortlessness at high output, creators recognize it as long stretches of clean focus. Reduced internal entropy is not spiritual jargon, it is fewer wasted microjoules per decision. If you want to test this in your own lab, the body, run a 14-day protocol with measurable endpoints. Each morning, before exposure to headlines or social feeds, breathe at a cadence near 6 cycles per minute for 5 minutes, letting exhale last a touch longer than inhale. Then call up one specific instance of appreciation and locate it somatically: sternum warmth, abdomen ease, face softening. Rate your felt coherence from 1 to 10, not as judgment but as data. During the day, tag 3 micro-moments when you catch opportunity you would have missed: a name remembered at the right time, a sentence that de-escalated conflict, a connection made between 2 ideas. Each evening, repeat a shorter version of the practice and note sleep quality, time to sleep, and wake episodes. At the end of 2 weeks, you will likely see tighter variance in reaction times on any app-based cognitive test you choose, modest gains in heart rate variability if you track it, and, more importantly, a narrative of small wins that starts to feel like momentum. Socially, gratitude reorganizes network topology. In groups, one regulated nervous system can entrain others through prosody and pacing. Meetings where someone anchors in appreciation tend to show turn-taking with fewer interruptions and more idea propagation before evaluation. If you lead teams, start with a 90-second round in which members name one recent contribution from another person. The point is not morale theater, it is to prime the group's salience filters toward mutual resource detection. Projects that benefit from cross-pollination move faster because the collective predictive model assigns higher expected value to sharing partial solutions early. Even pain interacts with this state. Pain perception is part nociception and part context. Gratitude does not anesthetize, but it can raise the precision of sensory inference so the brain stops amplifying ambiguous signals into global alarms. People often report that background aches recede while signal events, real problems that need attention, stand out with greater clarity. This selective amplification prevents learned helplessness, which is the true enemy of change. You begin to treat setbacks as data instead of verdicts. None of this works if gratitude is performed as a mask. The body can tell when language and physiology are out of phase. The skill is in titration. If you are in acute distress, you do not leap to celebration, you start with relief, one breath that feels a shade easier, one muscle that can afford to release a few %. From relief, you can reach neutrality, from neutrality, quiet appreciation, from appreciation, genuine gratitude. Each rung up the ladder reassigns resources from defense to design. Over time, the baseline creeps upward, and what once required deliberate practice becomes your default. As the baseline rises, you will notice a structural change in identity. Instead of organizing around what must be protected, you begin organizing around what can be offered. The questions you ask shift from, "How do I avoid loss?" to, "What would make this excellent?" That 1-degree turn accumulates across thousands of micro-decisions. The environment reflects it back through better collaborators, clearer feedback, and occasional doors that open exactly when you arrive. From the outside, it looks improbable. From the inside, it feels like physics, coherent oscillators, lower entropy, cleaner predictions, and a system that naturally moves toward the states it rehearses most. There is a leverage point in interoception that most people overlook. The insula, the cortex's map of the body, updates your sense of how I am several times per second. Gratitude changes the priors on that map from deficit to adequacy, which alters how strongly ascending sensory noise must spike before the brain launches a defensive program. That raised threshold is not denial, it is better calibration. When the HPA axis no longer fires at subthreshold perturbations, cortisol pulses regain their healthy circadian amplitude, and the nervous system stops budgeting for disasters that never arrive. Energy once sequestered for imaginary emergencies can be redirected into synaptic change. Hebbian plasticity likes calm fuel. Astrocytes participate in this story. They choreograph local learning through calcium waves and metabolic support. Under chronic alarm, astrocytes gate glutamate differently and clamp plasticity. Under appreciative, slow breath states, their timing favors consolidation over suppression. Even the glymphatic system, the brain's nighttime cleaning crew, benefits when gratitude stabilizes deep sleep. Interstitial flow clears metabolites more efficiently, leaving cortical networks less sticky with yesterday's residue. A cleaner substrate learns faster. When you wake with fewer unprocessed alarms, you reach for curiosity before complaint, and that choice becomes structural over time. Gratitude shifts decision economics by changing temporal discounting. Stress deepens the discount curve, tomorrow's benefit looks worthless compared to today's relief. Appreciation flattens that curve. The prefrontal cortex can then hold multi-step plans without being hijacked by immediate discomfort. You experience this as newfound patience with practice, willingness to rehearse fundamentals, capacity to delay the cheap dopamine of scrolling in favor of the rich dopamine of progress. The brain is not being tricked, it is updating expected value under a safer internal regime. At the sensoromotor edge, stochastic resonance offers a metaphor. A little well-timed noise can boost detection of weak signals. Gratitude provides structured noise, microvariability in breath and heart rhythms that enhances sensitivity to faint affordances, an offhand remark that contains a lead, a subtle facial cue that signals openness, the half-formed idea worth writing down. The basal ganglia then select actions with less dithering because the value landscape is smoother and the peaks are clearer. The subjective translation is serendipity that seems to happen more often, when in fact you are catching low-amplitude opportunities you once ignored. The social channel amplifies this further through resonance. Mirror systems do not only reflect movement, they infer state. Coherent prosody, relaxed micro-movements, and synchronized eye-voice timing are measurable consequences of an appreciative body. Others entrain to those cues and reciprocate with disclosure, collaboration, and generosity. Networks rewire around nodes that reduce coordination cost, and gratitude makes you such a node. Projects accelerate not because you push harder, but because you reduce drag in the information flow. The gut participates through bidirectional vagal traffic. Microbiome composition responds to stress chemistry and, in turn, shapes neurotransmitter precursors. When appreciation downshifts sympathetic tone, digestive motility normalizes, nutrient extraction improves, and the raw materials for learning, amino acids for receptors, fatty acids for membranes, arrive on time. Over weeks, you feel fewer energy crashes and less irritability after meals. That stability is not mood magic, it is logistics. To operationalize, couple state induction with implementation intentions so the chemistry translates into behavior. Pick a cue you encounter daily, door handles, loading bars, the kettle's click, and attach a compact protocol. One slow exhale, place attention on the sternum, name one present tense appreciation with sensory detail, then act on the most generous interpretation available. You are aligning neuromodulators with a micro-commitment window. The loop closes quickly, state shapes action, action yields a small win, the win becomes fresh evidence that updates priors toward, this works, which makes the next induction easier. Gratitude also refines metacognition. In threat states, confidence and accuracy decouple, you can feel certain while being wrong or hesitant while being right. Appreciation tightens that calibration. On tasks where you rate confidence after each choice, coherence tends to reduce overconfidence on errors and raise rightful confidence on correct answers. This alignment matters in real life because it cuts both false bravado and self-sabotage. You commit when you should and course-correct when needed, wasting less time in the gray zone. Pain science offers a rigorous test. Catastrophizing amplifies nociception into suffering, reappraisal reduces it. A gratitude-primed brain performs cleaner inference about bodily inputs, letting you distinguish signal pain that protects tissue from noise pain that only protects identity. This precision prevents fear avoidance spirals, keeps you moving, and preserves function while genuine healing proceeds. The result is not stoicism, it is accuracy under kinder chemistry. For creative work, treat gratitude like a warm start for the generative model. Before ideation, induce coherence for 3 minutes, then impose a constraint, 10 headlines in 5 minutes, 5 sketches from one shape, 3 metaphors for the same mechanism. Constraints force exploration of underused pathways, appreciation keeps the error penalty low so you don't abort the search early. The hippocampus will remix patterns more freely, and the prefrontal cortex will tolerate novelty long enough for utility to emerge. None of this requires perfection. The system learns from averages. If you miss the morning practice but catch 2 micro-inductions and an evening wind down, the day still tilts toward order. Track it like a scientist, 1 number for perceived coherence, 1 for sleep onset, 1 for a micro-win. Watch the trend, not the noise. When setbacks arrive, as they will, use gratitude not to sugarcoat but to stabilize the platform from which you adapt. The physics stays the same, lower internal entropy, tighter coupling of oscillators, cleaner priors, and a body-brain instrument that can translate intention into measurable shifts in trajectory. Gratitude also alters how the brain times movement and speech. The cerebellum, which fine-tunes prediction about when events will occur, becomes more accurate when background stress is low and cardiac rhythm is stable. In that steadier terrain, you place sentences with cleaner prosody, you pause in the pocket instead of rushing, and your hands execute micro-corrections without conscious effort. The felt sense is, I'm landing in time. Timing is not decoration, it is how influence travels. Conversations, negotiations, teaching moments, each one is a choreography of anticipations and updates. Appreciation brings the metronomes into phase so your signal arrives when others can receive it. At the level of cortical communication, gratitude reduces crosstalk that masquerades as thought. Interhemispheric coherence improves when alpha rhythms are clean, which makes it easier to integrate analytic parsing from the left with spatial, relational mapping from the right. Problems that were previously attacked as linear lists can now be held as shapes in working memory. You rotate them, swap components, and feel where tension sits before you compute. That sense of, I see the whole, is a neural economy, fewer edges to traverse, fewer backtracks. Because costs are lower, exploration lengthens, and better solutions appear not as force strokes but as convergences that suddenly make aesthetic sense. Reward chemistry adapts accordingly. Dopamine teaches by prediction error. Under constant stress, it rewards relief rather than progress, which trains avoidance. In appreciation, the baseline is quiet enough that small advances produce crisp, informative errors. The system learns to enjoy the micro-win of a paragraph clarified, a drill repeated precisely, a conversation de-escalated. This is not bland positivity, it is a skilled reshaping of the reward landscape so that sustainable behaviors carry intrinsic draw. Over time, you become a connoisseur of steady signals instead of a chaser of spikes. Even the sense of self, often treated as a single voice, is a coalition of processes that must arbitrate. In alarm, arbitration collapses. One loud subroutine hijacks behavior to minimize immediate risk. In gratitude, arbitration reopens. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex can weigh value with nuance, the dorsal anterior cingulate can compare options without urgency bias, and sensoromotor plans can weight the extra tenth of a second that separates compulsion from choice. That tenth is the birthplace of better futures, the message you rewrite before sending, the purchase you delay, the apology you deliver while it can still repair. There is a practical mathematics to all this in the form of base rates. Most days do not hinge on grand decisions, they hinge on dozens of small ones. If gratitude lowers the error rate of each decision by a few percentage points, fewer reactive replies, fewer skipped reps, fewer misread cues, compounding takes over. Like incremental improvements in a control system, the variance of outcomes shrinks, and the mean drifts upward. Others perceive this as reliability. Reliability attracts trust, and trust opens doors that raw talent cannot pry. Pain points reveal the boundaries of the skill. Gratitude is not suppression, unprocessed data will surface. The art is to keep interoceptive honesty while maintaining coherence. You let the chest tighten, you name it, you lengthen the exhale, and you locate one small, unarguable piece of goodness in parallel. Holding both signals, truth and appreciation, prevents the nervous system from equating acknowledgement with collapse. Over repetitions, the organism learns that feeling fully does not mean losing form. That lesson frees trapped energy and returns it to design. Creativity benefits from deliberate perturbation inside a safe container. Induce coherence for 3 minutes, then inject a structured challenge, invert the premise of your idea, devise 3 wrong solutions quickly, or translate the problem into a different medium, sound into sketch, sketch into metaphor. The appreciative body keeps the error penalty low enough that your search algorithm roams, the constraint prevents aimless wandering. Most breakthroughs arrive not from more force but from wider sampling under kinder chemistry. Relationships reorganize when you bring this state into contact. Appreciation changes the micrometrics of presence, your blink rate slows slightly, your head nods become more contingent, tracking others' rhythms, and your voice carries a steadier fundamental with fewer strained harmonics. People may not have language for any of this, but their bodies detect it. Disclosure increases, escalation thresholds rise, and collaborative bandwidth expands. The group feels safer trying partial, imperfect thoughts, which is the only way original synthesis occurs. You become the person in the room whose nervous system lowers the cost of being brave. Gratitude also clarifies boundaries because it reduces the need to harvest validation. When internal sufficiency is present, you can say no without agitation and yes without bargaining. This prevents the classic pattern where generosity turns to resentment. The prefrontal cortex can represent both your needs and others' needs simultaneously without collapsing into either appeasement or defiance. The cleanest no often preserves more connection than the sloppy yes, and appreciation supplies the chemistry for that clarity. Sleep remains the silent amplifier. A body that ends the day in gratitude tends to avoid the midnight cortisol surge that fragments rest. Slow waves deepen, glymphatic clearance improves, and the hippocampus writes a cleaner index of what to keep. Morning then starts with a nervous system that does not have to shovel yesterday out of the way before it can learn. Gratitude here is not a mantra but a physiological handoff, from waking coherence to nocturnal repair. There is a reason advanced performers across domains ritualize appreciation before stress. It is the most portable state shift, no gear, no location, only breath and attention. Before you step on stage, enter a courtroom, join a difficult call, or sit down to the blank page, run a 60-second micro-protocol, exhale slowly, lengthen the next inhale without strain, feel weight in the feet, relax the jaw, soften the gaze to take in peripheral vision, and name, silently and specifically, one thing about this exact moment that is workable. Not perfect, workable. You are telling the organism, resources are here, the signal is strong, proceed. From a systems view, gratitude is a low-energy way to impose order. It synchronizes oscillators, lowers internal entropy, and improves model fit to reality. That is why it feels like a higher frequency, without requiring belief in mystical emissions. Coherent systems convert small, well-timed inputs into large, meaningful outputs. In a coherent human, a kind sentence shifts a meeting, a timely pause alters a negotiation, an extra rehearsal loop turns a presentation from adequate to unforgettable. The world does not bend by decree, it aligns to clean measurement. If you want to scale this beyond the self, embed it in environments. Make coherence cheap. Arrange workspaces with visible daylight and quiet edges, schedule important conversations after brief breathing resets, begin team sessions by naming recent, concrete contributions, close with one thing each person is taking forward. None of these are rituals for show. They are mechanisms that tune collective physiology toward exploration over defense. Culture, at base, is the average state the group returns to under pressure. Gratitude, practiced correctly, raises that average. Expect setbacks and treat them as diagnostic. If appreciation feels unreachable, step down the ladder, aim for neutrality or simple relief first. If gratitude feels mechanical, add sensory detail until the body joins, temperature, texture, weight, sound. If you drift during practice, anchor attention on the length of the exhale. If gratitude collapses under conflict, prepare in advance. Write a bridge sentence you can speak even while upset, something like, "I want this to go well," or "I'm willing to understand." These micro-tools keep just enough coherence online to prevent the spiral. Over months, identity quiets into function. You stop performing the grateful person and become someone whose nervous system defaults to sufficiency. From that baseline, intention needs less strain, and results look improbably aligned not because reality is magical, but because your measurement of it is finally clean. The physics is simple: lower noise, tighter coupling, better predictions, and action that lands where it can actually work. Keep rehearsing the state until the body carries it without your help, and let the environment mirror it back with its own kind of gratitude, doors that open, timing that clicks, and problems that yield at the tap rather than the hammer. Gratitude refines how you handle uncertainty. Most of life's pivotal moments arrive as partial information, ambiguous emails, mixed signals in a negotiation, an experiment that almost works. Under alarm, ambiguity is framed as threat and the system narrows to one brittle hypothesis. Under appreciation, ambiguity becomes a workspace. The anterior insula still flags uncertainty, but the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex keeps multiple models live without rushing to closure. You can run A, B/C mental simulations, test them with small behaviors, and update quickly. This tolerance for not knowing is the cognitive equivalent of a wide stance, stable, ready to pivot, able to absorb surprise without losing balance. Gratitude also recalibrates error bars on self-assessment. Skilled performers are not the ones who feel invincible, they are the ones whose confidence tracks reality tightly. With appreciative coherence online, interoceptive noise drops, and the metacognitive layer can estimate its own accuracy with fewer distortions. You notice when fatigue is biasing judgment and you correct with a micro break rather than a grand collapse. You sense when a piece of work is genuinely complete instead of compulsively polishing past the point of return. This saves enormous energy that would otherwise be burned chasing illusions of control. The body's timing circuits translate state into performance. The basal ganglia negotiate, go, versus, hold, hundreds of times per second. Stress biases the gate toward premature action or frozen restraint. Appreciation restores the delicate rhythm of pause then commit. That clean separation means your first move in conversation lands as intentional rather than defensive, your opening line in a presentation carries forward momentum with no push, your first step in a sprint is vertical force, not scattered noise. Over many repetitions, this becomes your signature, a way of moving through tasks that feels unforced and, to others, trustworthy. Learning accelerates when costs for honest feedback fall. In an appreciative state, criticism does not threaten identity as much because identity is not organized around scarcity. You can parse a hard note for its signal and discard its static. Mirror neurons fire not to defend but to understand, and the cerebellum quietly updates internal models of timing, tone, and posture. The loop from exposure to adjustment shortens. A musician hears a microscopic intonation drift and corrects in the next bar, a coder senses a brittle abstraction and refactors before debt compounds, a parent notices escalation and softens voice one sentence earlier than before. Each microcorrection is a vote for the future you are practicing. Gratitude's relationship to imagination is practical. When you rehearse a desired outcome from a state of sufficiency rather than lack, the brain encodes it as a plausible next frame, not a far-off rescue. Hippocampal replay during quiet rest then stitches that frame into multiple contexts, increasing the odds you recognize the doorway when it appears in unfamiliar packaging. You do not will events into existence, you cultivate a library of patterns the nervous system can match against the world. When the rhyme appears, a phrase in a meeting, a shape in data, a tone in someone's voice, you feel the click of recognition and step through before doubt fills the space. There is a quiet physics to interpersonal influence that gratitude unlocks. Influence is not volume, it is impedance matching between your signal and another nervous system. An appreciative body reduces sharp impedance spikes, those microsignals of urgency and need, that otherwise reflect your message back at you. With fewer reflections, more of your meaning transmits. People report they understood you immediately or felt safe to think out loud. That experience is not mystical, it is lower friction at the interface. Pain offers another lens. In many chronic conditions, nociception is amplified by predictive bias, the brain expects pain and interprets ambiguous input accordingly. Genuine appreciation shifts the baseline expectation, letting sensory evidence earn its way into consciousness rather than being promoted by default. You still respect true injury, but you stop rehearsing suffering when tissue risk is low. Movement becomes possible without catastrophic prediction, and motion is the one stimulus the brain trusts most to revise maps. As motion returns, function returns, and identity follows. The ecology of attention changes with gratitude. Modern environments are engineered to harvest your focus with intermittent rewards. Appreciation strengthens the musculature that opts out. When you feel internally resourced, the bait of novelty loses some pull, and you can stay with a hard page, a delicate conversation, a slow design pass. That staying power is less about discipline and more about reduced craving. You already feel enough, so you can allocate attention where value accumulates rather than where it merely spikes. To translate state into durable trait, pair appreciation with specificity. The nervous system learns from exactness. Vague gratitude, life is good, has limited leverage. Concrete gratitude, the way the light sits on that book, the warmth in my hands, the 2 words that unlocked a paragraph, provides high-resolution data for the salience network. You are teaching the brain what to notice next time. Precision builds a map, maps guide action, action confirms the state, the loop thickens into identity. On longer horizons, gratitude upgrades persistence. Goals rarely fail from lack of desire, they fail at the interface with boredom and setback. Appreciation shifts the reward schedule so that process yields enough reinforcement to carry you through flat stretches. You stop needing milestones to grant permission for joy, you front-load joy into the steps themselves. Paradoxically, this detachment from outcome improves outcomes, because effort remains consistent even when external feedback is delayed. Systems thinkers call this robustness to lag, artists call it staying in love with the work. None of this denies complexity or tragedy. Gratitude coexists with grief, it does not override it. The skill is to maintain a stable internal reference while you metabolize what hurts. When you can feel both at once, the ache and the appreciation, you prevent the nervous system from collapsing into all-or-nothing interpretations. That prevents learned hopelessness and keeps agency online. Agency, held softly, is the engine of transformation, not the fantasy of total control, but the reliable capacity to take the next wise step from where you stand. Practice remains the hinge. Minutes, not hours. Repetitions, not heroics. Enter the state on purpose, attach it to small behaviors, collect evidence with curiosity, let compounding do the heavy lift. Over weeks, the organism learns that gratitude is not a mood to wait for but a method to invoke, a lever that lowers noise, synchronizes oscillators, clarifies predictions, and aligns behavior with the futures you are willing to rehearse. Gratitude recalibrates perception the way a Kalman filter updates a noisy signal. You bring a prior, your internal model of how life goes, you receive measurements, sensory data, social cues, and the filter blends them according to estimated uncertainty. In alarm, internal noise is high, so the brain overweights priors of threat and underweights fresh evidence. In appreciation, internal noise drops, the gain on new data increases. Subtle opportunities, once dismissed as outliers, get incorporated into the state estimate. The result is not magical thinking but better state tracking. Your actions align with what is actually unfolding, not with a defensive hallucination of worst case. At the microcircuit level, inhibitory interneurons act like the system's brakes and gates. Chronic stress skews excitation/inhibition balance, forcing the cortex to waste energy suppressing runaway chatter. Gratitude restores balance. Gamma bursts, fast synchronization events that bind features into coherent perception, become cleaner when inhibition is precise. Coherent gamma is the neural correlate of clicks, of insight, elements that didn't fit suddenly locked together. The felt experience is elegance rather than effort, a tidy solution emerging from the same inputs that previously produced friction. Hormesis offers a biological analog. Organisms adapt to small, well-timed stressors by upgrading resilience. Appreciation creates the baseline from which hormetic doses of challenge can be beneficial. When the body predicts safety, you can deliberately lean into discomfort, cold exposure, a difficult conversation, a new skill, without pushing the system into allostatic overload. The endocrine response stays in the Goldilocks zone, catecholamines rise enough to mobilize, cortisol pulses remain brief, and the afterglow converts into learning rather than depletion. That afterglow is your nervous system filing the experience under, can handle, expanding future capacity. Language is another lever. Words are not just labels, they are control signals that prime neural ensembles. When gratitude is somatically present, a single verb changes behavior economics. I get to recruits curiosity circuits, I have to recruits avoidance. Over time, this linguistic torque bends trajectories. It's subtle, 5% less friction at every decision node, but compounding turns subtle into structural. The same project, under a different internal narration, becomes a different project. Motor learning shows the same principle. Skilled movers, dancers, climbers, surgeons, use gratitude rituals not as superstition but as state setting. In a coherent state, the cerebellum's error correction loop runs with lower latency and higher fidelity. You sense small deviations sooner, correct with fewer overshoots, and engrave cleaner motor primitives. This is why a grateful warm-up yields sessions where the body learns from me. The system is not fighting its own noise floor, it's free to refine. Placebo and nocebo effects reveal the leverage of prediction. Expectation shapes physiology. Analgesics work better when you trust the context, innocuous stimuli hurt when you expect harm. Gratitude upgrades context by signaling sufficiency and coherence. You are not faking outcomes, you are clarifying the prior so genuine signals can land. The immune system, reading the same context, toggles from vigilance to repair, digestion resumes, sleep deepens. The cumulative effect is a higher signal-to-noise body in which small, wise behaviors actually register as progress instead of being swallowed by static. Chronobiology brings timing into focus. Cells keep clocks, molecular gears that anticipate dawn and dusk. Stress desynchronizes these clocks across tissues, creating internal jet lag. Evening appreciation practices act like zeitgebers, time givers, that resynchronize subsystems. A short, specific gratitude review paired with dim light and a slower exhale tells peripheral clocks, night chemistry now. Morning appreciation in daylight performs the complementary reset. Over weeks, cortisol peaks return to early morning, melatonin to night, insulin sensitivity improves, and your subjective, good days, stop feeling random. From a control theory vantage, gratitude increases robustness and reduces control effort. In engineering terms, you're widening stability margins, the system tolerates perturbations without oscillation or collapse. That's why you can absorb a sharp email, a delayed train, a surprising bill, and still execute your plan with minor tuning instead of a full derailment. Energy that once vanished into damping oscillations is now available for trajectory change. You don't push harder, you waste less. Imagination under appreciation becomes simulation rather than escape. You run future scenes as embodied rehearsals, tone of voice, posture, pacing, contingencies. The brain timestamps these simulations with possible here, not fantasy elsewhere, because the interoceptive backdrop matches the chemistry of competent action. Hippocampal prefrontal loops then integrate the rehearsal into your policy set, the decision rules you apply under pressure. When the moment arrives, behavior feels like recognition rather than invention. Group dynamics scale the physics. Teams with a culture of sincere appreciation exhibit higher communication efficiency, fewer handoffs drop, fewer loops spin, more partial ideas surface early. This is measurable as decreased latency between proposal and iteration and increased diversity of contributors in early phases. The mechanism is simple, defensive cost is lower, so bandwidth for exploration is higher. Gratitude is not the whole culture, but it is the cheapest way to bias the network toward collective intelligence over collective anxiety. A final nuance is error hygiene. In coherent gratitude, you still make mistakes, you just metabolize them at the right granularity. Instead of global self-verdicts, you perform local fixes, adjust the variable, rehearse the sentence, rework the line. This preserves momentum. The organism learns that error is information, not identity, keeping plasticity open. Over seasons, that is the deepest rewrite, you stop relating to reality as a judge to appease and begin relating as a partner to calibrate. From that partnership, transformation stops being an event and becomes your baseline operating mode. From an information theory angle, gratitude lowers internal entropy and raises mutual information between what you sense and what you intend to do next. In high alarm states, noisy interoceptive channels degrade the effective bandwidth of perception. The brain spends bits explaining away phantom threats. Appreciation quiets spurious fluctuations so each incoming cue carries more task-relevant signal. You can feel this as precision, lines look cleaner, voices are easier to parse, choices separate into cleaner clusters. In network neuroscience terms, the brain's graph shifts toward efficient integration, modular communities, sensory, limbic, executive, keep their specializations, yet hub nodes, anterior cingulate, insula, dorsolateral PFC, increase participation coefficients just enough to coordinate without overcoupling. That balance is the sweet spot for creative, goal-directed behavior. Neuromodulators allocate computational budgets. Norepinephrine sets the gain on unexpected events, acetylcholine sharpens feature attention, dopamine encodes the worth of exploring versus exploiting. Chronic stress forces norepinephrine into tonic fog, everything seems urgent and nothing is informative. Genuine appreciation restores phasic spikes, the system idles quietly until a real cue appears, then mobilizes precisely. Acetylcholine can then sculpt sensory cortices instead of fighting background chatter, and dopamine stops rewarding mere relief, shifting back to reinforcing well-aimed progress. The subjective translation is simple: fewer compulsions, more clean impulses. Risk calculus changes measurably. Under threat, prospect theory's loss aversion steepens, small losses loom larger than equivalent gains, so you reject good bets and cling to bad ones. Gratitude flattens that curve toward normative decision-making by reducing internal cost of error. You can take wise risks because your physiology no longer treats ambiguity as pain. Experiments that once died in the planning stage now reach the first data threshold, and feedback arrives soon enough to steer. Learning accelerates not because you are braver, but because the penalty for sampling reality has dropped. Timing and motor precision reveal the same physics. With cardiac respiratory coherence online, cerebellar predictions of when tighten, electromyography shows fewer co-contractions during fine movements, which translates to smoother keystrokes, steadier voice on difficult phrases, and cleaner transitions in athletic skills. The brain burns fewer joules dampening self-generated noise, so more energy is available for plastic change. You notice this as days where practice feels cheap, repetitions accrue without the usual friction. Memory systems become more Bayesian. Hippocampal replay prefers trajectories that end in safety. When appreciation sets that context, replay samples wider neighborhoods of state space. You retrieve not just what failed or hurt, but also the adjacent attempts that almost worked. During reconsolidation, those near misses can be re-tagged as promising paths rather than dead ends. Over weeks, the policy you carry into hard tasks encodes more branch points, so you pivot sooner and stall less. Gratitude even modifies perceptual priors at the edge of pain and fatigue. Interoceptive inference tries to explain bodily signals with the simplest model that fits. In alarm, the simplest model is, "I'm not safe," and ambiguous sensations are promoted to alarms. Appreciation raises the precision threshold. The system demands clearer evidence before escalating. You still respect true limits, injury, depletion, but stop paying the tax of catastrophizing. Mobility returns, and with it the motion-generated data that keeps maps accurate. Language acts as a control input to these dynamics. Verbs that imply choice and access, I get to, I choose to, I'm learning to, prime premotor and valuation circuits differently than verbs of compulsion. When those words ride on the chemistry of appreciation, they stop being affirmations and start being parameters. You are not convincing yourself, you are setting initial conditions that shape the system's trajectory through the next hour. On the social layer, appreciation reduces interface impedance. Prosody smooths, micropauses land, voice timing syncs with listeners' rhythms. Measurably, turn-taking becomes less interruptive and idea propagation latency shrinks. Groups enter a regime of constructive interference, where partial thoughts add rather than cancel. That is what psychological safety feels like from the inside: lower metabolic cost per contribution, higher return per shared signal. To operationalize the physics without ceremony, stack micro-inductions at natural checkpoints. Before opening a message that matters, one long exhale, soften the gaze to include peripheral vision, find one specific detail you appreciate in the scene, then open. Before a call, 5 slow breaths, jaw loose, name a generous intention you can actually enact. Before sleep, 3 concrete appreciations in sensory terms, then let the exhale lengthen until the shoulders drop on their own. You are repeatedly teaching the organism a mapping, coherence action tiny win updated prior. Compounding turns that loop from state into trait. Creativity benefits from pairing coherence with deliberate perturbation. Enter appreciation for 90 seconds, then force novelty with a constraint: 30 headlines in 10 minutes, 5 thumbnails from one shape, 3 alternative proofs for the same claim. Because error cost is low, the search algorithm roams; because constraints bind, it roams productively. Insights arrive as low-noise gamma clicks, not as white-knuckled forcing. When setbacks hit, use dual-channel processing. Keep one channel on unedited truth, let the breath go ragged for a moment, name what hurts precisely, while the second channel maintains a thin line of appreciation for any workable element. Holding both signals prevents identity collapse and preserves the executive bandwidth required to choose the next wise move. The physiology learns that intensity is survivable without shutting down exploration. Over seasons, the architecture of you simplifies. Fewer cycles are spent on defensive prediction, more on design and repair. The organism behaves like a tuned system: lower internal entropy, cleaner priors, tighter coupling between intent and perception, and a reward landscape that favors repeated, meaningful work. Gratitude is not garnish on this process, it is the low-energy control parameter that makes the whole stack, cells, circuits, skills, relationships, easier to steer. At microscopic scales, gratitude appears as a shift in bioelectric set points. Cells maintain membrane voltages that shape growth, repair, and communication. Tissues, from heart to cortex, form voltage landscapes that guide signals like rivers follow gradients. Under chronic alarm, those gradients get jagged, ion channels flicker in defensive patterns and conduction reliability drops. In appreciative coherence, voltage variability becomes structured rather than chaotic, gap junctions pass cleaner rhythms, conduction delays stabilize. The practical outcome is better timing across scales. Calcium spikes in astrocytes line up with synaptic needs, cardiac repolarization aligns with respiration, and cortical assemblies can hold patterns long enough for insight to cohere rather than sputter. Proprioception, your sense of body in space, quietly anchors this. When threat dominates, extensors brace, fascia stiffens, breath migrates to the upper chest, and the brain receives a map of narrow, brittle, urgent. Appreciation lengthens exhale, widens stance, and softens facial tone just enough to restore glide between layers. Mechanoreceptors in joints and skin then send higher fidelity data to the cerebellum, which improves forward models of movement and speech. Better models reduce corrective micromotions, and fewer corrections free bandwidth for cognition. What looks from the outside like poise is, on the inside, a reduction of wasted micronewtons per second. Entrainment offers a social analog. 2 people in coherent appreciation show measurable interbrain coupling in low-frequency bands, heart intervals begin to echo, turn-taking grows rhythmic. The information cost of cooperation falls because prediction gets easier, each nervous system can anticipate the other's timing without straining. This is why a single regulated person can tilt a room, their stable oscillators become a reference the group unconsciously locks to, raising collective clarity without a speech about mindset. From a complexity perspective, gratitude nudges the nervous system toward criticality, the regime between rigidity and chaos where computation is richest. Neuronal avalanches follow scale-free distributions there, small inputs can propagate meaningfully without runaway storms. Alarm pushes the system toward supercritical bursts, panic, or subcritical damping, numbness. Appreciation returns it to the edge, where patterns can evolve, combine, and select. In this regime, exploration becomes cheap and exploitation becomes precise, exactly the cocktail creative problem-solving demands. Perception under appreciation becomes more veridical because priors loosen their grip. Bayes requires a good balance between expectation and evidence, fear locks expectations, gratitude reweights evidence. You hear micro-inflections in a voice and infer intent more accurately. You read a draft and detect the sentence that's carrying hidden friction, you scan data and notice the anomaly that is actually a clue, not a threat. Over time, this higher mutual information between world and model is what people call intuition, fast, accurate recognition born from clean sampling rather than mystical foresight. Hormonal kinetics reflect these shifts. Cortisol retains its diurnal peak where it belongs, early morning mobilization, rather than spiking at midnight. Catecholamine bursts become event-locked instead of tonic haze. Oxytocin rises enough to bias collaboration but not so much that boundaries blur. Insulin sensitivity improves when sleep deepens, and the brain gets steadier glucose delivery, which preserves executive function late in the day. None of this is magic, it's logistics done right by a body that believes it is safe enough to schedule optimization instead of emergency response. Gratitude interacts with novelty the way a good laboratory interacts with a new hypothesis. You hold variables stable, breath, posture, tone, then perturb one parameter with curiosity. Because internal noise is low, signal to noise for the perturbation is high, you learn quickly. Try a new cadence in your opening paragraph, a gentler entry into a hard conversation, a different aiming cue in your lift. The feedback is crisp, the adjustment is small, the next trial improves. Micro-iterations stack into macro change without the drama of revolutions. Pain science provides hard tests. Predictions of harm amplify nociception, predictions of safety attenuate it. Gratitude does not gaslight pain, it clarifies context so the brain can stop treating every ambiguous signal as damage. With precision up, you can load tissue within true tolerance, and graded exposure rewires maps. Function returns not because you ignored the body, but because you finally listened with enough accuracy to dose movement correctly. Language remains a practical actuator. When embodied appreciation is present, swapping if for when, try for practice, or fix for improve changes policy selection in the basal ganglia. You bias toward repeatable actions over heroic spikes, toward experiments over verdicts. Over months, that bias is destiny. Small, low-variance steps traverse astonishing distances while the world is busy waiting for motivation. To keep the physics honest, instrument yourself lightly. A morning 1 to 10 coherence rating, based on breath ease, chest warmth, jaw softness, a nightly sleep onset note, a single tally of micro-wins noticed, keeps you anchored to data without turning life into a spreadsheet. If you have HRV, look for trend slopes, not daily noise. If you journal, log 3 sensory precise appreciations rather than abstract affirmations. Specificity trains the salience map, the map guides attention, attention drives behavior. When pressure spikes, split the channel rather than splitting yourself. Let one stream carry raw sensation, heat, tightness, speed, while a second stream holds a thin thread of appreciation for anything workable, the floor's solidity, the light on a surface, the fact that you can still choose your next breath. This dual processing prevents the collapse into binary thinking. The cortex stays online to arbitrate options while the limbic system completes its wave. Decisions made from that platform age well. The long arc looks like identity simplification. Less energy lost to guarding, more invested in building, fewer loops of self-convincing, more loops of practice, less peak chasing, more signal cultivation. You stop relating to gratitude as a mood and start using it as a control parameter. Set it, run the experiment of your day, collect outcome data, update priors, repeat. Physics has a word for systems that convert small, well-timed inputs into large effects: resonance. A grateful nervous system is resonant. It couples to what matters, rejects noise, and transduces intention into outcomes with fewer wasted cycles. Keep tuning, not to be nice, but to be accurate.